This is the Roots and All Budcast, presented by Sarah Wilson.
Hello and welcome to this week's Roots and All Budcast. Today I'll be talking about terrariums and tulips. Firstly, I'd like to thank those of you who've asked for some episode on houseplants. I'm pleased to say that the next episode of the main podcast, which is due out on the 28th of August, is all about houseplants. The good, the bad and the downright impossible. So please, if you're interested in houseplants, subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss out on future episodes. This podcast also starts with the subject of houseplants because I managed to catch up with Beth Otway, whose blog Pumpkin Beth is an absolute goldmine of gardening information, particularly on terrariums. You can find a link to her blog in the show notes, and if you're interested in terrariums, I would encourage you to go and explore her site because it contains the most brilliant information, all of which is gleaned from the trials she conducts in order to get the best results from her terrarium plants. Not only is the information comprehensive and fascinating, but Beth is also a talented photographer, and you can't fail to be wowed by the images she puts on her blog. I just wanted to share with you a few of the answers she gave to questions I asked about terrariums. And first off, I asked her what she thinks are the top performing terrarium plants for beginners. Beth said, "Phytonias are absolutely fantastic terrarium plants. Whatever colour scheme or style you favour, there's a Phytonia for you. Phytonias are commonly called nerve plants after the coloured veining of their leaves. Phytonias are very handsome plants. They have a luminescence and glow, which really lightens up the planting inside a terrarium. Phytonias are forgiving plants. They're so easy to grow, providing you have the right conditions. Phytonias require high humidity and low light levels to flourish. These evergreen perennials are perfectly suited to growing inside a terrarium. If you favour a white and green colour scheme, you may like to plant Phytonia albivenis, mosaic white, with its fresh green leaves with white veining, or perhaps if you're creating a more vibrantly coloured terrarium, you might choose Phytonia albivensis skeleton with its glowing red veined leaves. There are many different coloured Phytonias available. You'll find plants with white, pink, red and orange veining. I'm sure that you'll find a Phytonia to complement both your indoor planting scheme and your decor." So I went on to ask Beth what are some of the common mistakes people make with their terrariums, and she said, "A terrarium trend which has been going on for ages now and doesn't seem to be abating is the fashion for planting cacti and other succulents in terrariums. Cacti and succulents tend to be plants that originate from dry, arid, bright and sunny environments. They like free draining soil and to be grown in a container that has drainage holes so the water can run through the pot. These plants do not succeed in the very humid environments that a terrarium creates. Rather ironically, cacti and succulents grow best without a terrarium. They make super house plants. If you'd like to try growing these lovely plants, choose a container that has drainage holes and use a gritty, sandy, open, free-draining, peat-free compost. These types of plants tend to be great choices for a conservatory, a light, bright room or a sunny windowsill. I've noticed that a lot of people are still very keen to use a light bulb to create a terrarium. It's a novel idea, but light bulbs do not make good terrariums. Light bulbs are small and fragile, so they're much more likely to break. The tiny size of the light bulb creates problems for any plants you try to grow inside. With terrariums, bigger is definitely better. Larger terrariums are longer lasting and easier to care for. The greater the size of your terrarium, the more options you have open to you for planting, which is always a good thing. You could create a small terrarium in a jam jar, but clear glass containers that measure 20 centimetres in diameter or larger work best. So they're the answers Beth gave to 2 of my questions, and if you'd like to see the answers she gave to the other 6 questions I put to her, plus 2 fantastic photos of the Phytonias she mentioned in her first answer, you'll just have to go to my blog at www.rootsandall.co.uk to read the rest of the interview. The other topic I wanted to touch upon is bulbs, and specifically placing an order for your spring bulbs. I know it seems early, but if you leave placing your order for another month, you'll be surprised how quickly things sell out and become unavailable. This month, you should be looking to order bulbs that flower in the spring, so your tulips, daffodils, hyacinths, crocus, iris, muscari, anemones and fritillarias. I will be producing a podcast on bulbs, but as a brief overview, remember that tulips are not to be treated as perennials. which means they are not guaranteed to come up year after year. I know it sounds surprising, but it is true. The tulips that will come back year on year are the species tulips. Species tulips are called that because they're the tulips you can find in the wild. They haven't been interbred. The tulips you find for sale by the bunch in M&S or the large flowered tulips you see in beautiful colours are most likely hybrids. And hybridisation gives you larger flowers and stems, it gives you fancy petal forms and beautiful uniform colours, but these come at a price, the price being that the bulbs are less likely to come back year after year. Over the past few years, the tulips have been surprisingly perennial. For example, the tulips I planted in autumn of 2014 managed to flower fairly well in spring 2015, 16 and 17. However, the number of bulbs that came up and the size of the flowers was diminished in each successive year. However, the winter of 2017-18 was harsh, and in spring 2018, barely any of those 2014 bulbs survived. So you can see it depends on the type of year we have, but to avoid disappointment, it's always good to at least top up your tulip bulb numbers, even if you don't want to start from scratch each year. I order bulbs from 3 companies. There are obviously many more companies that sell them, but these are the ones I'm familiar with and I've received good results from them, so I'm happy to recommend them. If I'm ordering large quantities and I want value for money and a good range, I will order from J. Parker's. If I want quality bulbs that don't break the bank, I will order from Peter Nyson. And if I want to spend a little bit more but get absolutely stunning flowers, I will order from Blom's Bulbs. And what I will say about all of these companies is they have excellent customer service. And if you have any problems, then in my experience, you'll have no trouble sorting them out. Just one thing to note when you order your bulbs, sometimes they won't dispatch them until a good few weeks later. So if you ordered them now, you wouldn't be getting them for a fair few weeks. But you do need to be ready for when you take receipt of your bulbs to get them in the ground, because they will not like hanging around. It's very easy to buy them and think you'll get away with leaving them in the paper bag or the netting they come in for a week or two. This is the easiest way to lose them because they can quickly become mouldy and soft and they'll be no good. My top tip for tulips, if you're thinking of treating yourself to some, are if you want to go for white tulips, I would go for Purissima and Spring Green because they're gorgeous tulips. They've got a lovely clean white colour rather than being adulterated by tints of other colours such as cream or pink, and they actually look good planted together. If you want a warmer colour, you could do Ursan Cairo, which is an unusual orangey brown, and it looks really good planted with dark red tulips. Gavota is a bit of a Marmite tulip because it's dark red with a band of yellow outside the rim of the petals. I inherited a clump of these when I moved into my house, and they've come up year after year despite what I said about tulips not being perennial, and I've grown to love them. The other tulip I'll be planting in my own garden in large numbers will be Anthracite, and the spelling of that is in the show notes. This is a deep pink tulip, and last year it performed the best out of all the varieties I trialled, and I did trial quite a few. It flowered on, and it looked brilliantly cheerful when everything around it looked miserable. So that's terrariums and tulips, and that is it for this podcast. As always, if you have any comments or suggestions for future episodes, don't forget to email me podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. So get growing, and I'll catch you next Tuesday.
For more information, visit the Roots and All website at rootsandall.co.uk. To download more episodes, visit iTunes, your favourite podcast provider, or get them direct from our website.